Well, it is 7:02 and I like to be punctual. We're all journalists here, or I like to call myself a recovering journalist. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here this evening. My name is Dr. Imani Cheers, and I am the Associate Director in the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University. I'm also an Associate Professor of Digital Storytelling, and it is my honor to introduce you all and welcome you to this wonderful, wonderful event tonight. This event is co-sponsored, of course, by SMPA as well as Black Women Unmuted. If you don't know, you will know very shortly about that amazing organization. We have a powerhouse panel ahead of us. Of course, we have Ms. Sonia Ross, we have Aisha Roscoe, which I'm sure all of you have heard as the White House correspondent for NPR, and then Erin Haynes, editor-in-chief, editor-at-large, excuse me, and co-founder of the 19th. We also have, who hopefully will be joining us very soon, Ms. Shauna Thomas. She is an SMPA alum, which I love to shout out, SMPA alum, and is also currently the executive producer for CBS This Morning. We all know that we are in historic times. We saw back on November 6th, and of course, January 20th, the election, and then of course, the inauguration of Kamala Harris as the first Black woman and South Asian woman to be Vice President of the United States. And it's so historic and it's so amazing. And tonight we're going to have a conversation with this illustrious panel, also moderated by my colleague, one of the newest colleagues. I'm so excited he's with us, Mr. Jesse J. Holland. So it's going to be a wonderful conversation. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to let my colleagues take over. But thank you everyone again for joining us for this amazing, really important conversation. Also kind of wrapping up some of the Black History Month events that we do in SMPA. I'm so grateful for your time and thank you very much. So Jesse, take it away.
Imani, thank you so much for that great introduction. We have a powerhouse panel here, and I am lucky enough to be the moderator for this program. This means that I get to ask the questions and sit back and soak up the knowledge that our wonderful journalists on this panel will bring to us. I want to remind all of our viewers right now that you can participate in this great conversation. Please, if you have questions about anything that we're talking about tonight, put them in the Q&A and I will bring it up during the conversation. These journalists you see on screen know all, see all, and hopefully tonight they're going to tell all. This is going to be a great conversation. I would like to once again extend a thank you to all four of our great journalists for being here with us tonight. Sonia Ross, once again, as you heard, is the founder and editor-in-chief of Black Women Unmuted, who is co-sponsoring the program for us tonight. Aisha Roscoe is the White House correspondent for NPR. Erin Haynes is a founding mother and editor-at-large for the 19th, and Shauna Thomas, SMPA grad, and now the executive producer of CBS This Morning. Please join me in welcoming all of them to the program tonight. So you didn't come here to hear from me, but I want to introduce myself again. My name is Jesse Holland. I am the Saturday host of Washington Journal on C-SPAN and an assistant professor at the School of Media and Public Affairs. And we're here tonight to talk about the historic achievement of Kamala Harris becoming the first female vice president of the United States. Remember, you can add questions to this conversation by putting questions in the Q&A section of the conversation. So my first question to all of you, and I'll go around one at a time asking this question. What is the historical implications of Kamala Harris being the first female vice president? We've already had Barack Obama as the first Black president. What's the historical implications of Kamala Harris? And I'll start with you, Sonia.
Why did I know you would start with me? Thank you so much, Jesse, and thank you so much to the School of Media and Public Affairs at GW and to my esteemed sisters in media. I am so grateful to have you here and to be a part of this. Now, that said, to me, the biggest historical implication here is that a woman of color is defining the achievement for women. So often we run up on the bugaboo is what I want to call it, of intersectionality, where we are forced to make a choice. Are we going to be a woman in this instance, or are we going to be Black in this instance? Are we going to be a person of color in this instance? And for this moment in time, we, women of color, are defining the accomplishment for women. And that is part of the reason we are just so giddy and over the moon about Kamala Harris in this role. There certainly are people who are not that fond of Madam Vice President. We're not that fond of Madam Vice President, but are also looking past their own personal belief or personal feeling about her to get right to the accomplishment and what it means for all womankind. And that's just a great feeling.
Aisha, what do you think?
I think it's significant because like Sonia said, this is a Black woman taking on this role, the very first, the very first woman of any kind taking on this role, and that it is significant that other women will look at the way Kamala Harris carried herself in this situation. Everything she does will be somewhat of a precedent. It will be, people will look at, this is the way she conducted herself as vice president, as the first woman. And look, I think that we saw during the 2016 campaign that yes, we have had a Black president, but to have a woman in authority or at the highest level is still a reach for a lot of people. And I think that we, that as a country, people had to somewhat come to terms with that being a woman and trying to see them as possibly the commander-in-chief is not, that's not something that some people can still not see that even in this day and age. So seeing someone right now in Kamala Harris's position, so close to the commander-in-chief, being able to carry out all these duties, I think that is what's so significant.
Now, Aaron, when I turn to you, I'm going to turn the question just a little bit. I still want you to talk about the historical implications of Vice President Harris, but what do you say to those people out there? And we know that they're out there that say, y'all already had a Black president. What do you need with a Black female vice president as well?
We've already had a white man president. 44 times.
44 of them.
I reject that. I reject that. We get one, and we're supposed to be satisfied, and let's just go pack up and go home because it finally happened, one and done. Too many times first often means only, and I really prefer to frame it in those terms. The only woman who has ever been vice president of the United States, the only person of color who has ever served as president of the United States. But, I think that, Vice President Harris is somebody who is uniquely positioned for this role because as a Black woman, she is so used to being a barrier breaker, right? Before she was the first Black woman to serve as the second most powerful person in the country, she was the lone Black woman serving in the United States Senate, right? And there are now no Black women serving in the Senate. And before that, she was the first Black person and woman to serve as Attorney General of California. And before that, she was the first district attorney to serve, in that role in San Francisco. And so this is somebody who is used to being a first, used to being a Black person and a woman to be a first and to break those barriers. And so for her, certainly this is the highest position that a woman of color has ever attained and that a woman has ever attained in this country. But she is used to what that mantle means, and she understands what that can do for people's political imaginations in terms of thinking about what it means in this country in terms of who we think is qualified to lead, right? And what leadership looks like. And so, I think really what she has the potential to do just for normalizing women's leadership in this country is probably the most remarkable and significant thing that she could accomplish. I know, and I may be speaking too soon, Jesse. I'm just gonna say this though. I'm gonna put this out there.
Go ahead and say it, girl.
Keep my fingers crossed for this, but here we are. It's February 24th. I haven't seen one gratuitous Black History Month cutout type profile about Kamala Harris yet, right? Like normally, a lot of people's default settings would be, oh, look at this unicorn, for Black History Month. Let's hold her up, with everybody from Shirley Chisholm to Ida B. Wells to everybody else that we just kind of flatten and don't talk about in their totality, and really kind of just talking about. I mean, Kamala Harris is, yes, she's a first, she's a trailblazer, but she also she's the Vice President of the United States, and we spent all Black History Month talking about her being vice presidential, right? Not talking about her being Black, not talking about her being a woman. Every time Nancy Pelosi lifts the gavel, we don't mention that. We say Speaker Pelosi, because that is who Speaker Pelosi is, even though she was also a trailblazer. So again, normalizing women's leadership is really, that really, I think, can be the most remarkable shift for us as a democracy. So it's not just about her, but it is about how we as a country respond to her.
Don't forget, we got a couple more days left in February. So, now, Shauna,
we could still see it, but it may not happen. It hasn't happened yet.
Now, Shauna, I saw you co-signing down there, our SMPA grad down there, co-signing to Aaron. Jump in here in the conversation now.
Yeah, number one, I'm sorry about being late, but I literally started my job as EP of CBS this morning, 7 a.m. Eastern time on your local CBS station. You can also find it soon on Paramount Plus, as well as CBS In for those of you who cut the cord.
Go ahead and plug that show, Shauna. We got you.
I need the demo. But also, so I'm trying to figure out how to balance my job with doing great events like this. So thank you for that. I think in terms of historical implications, I mean, the one thing everyone has mentioned is just what it allows other young women of color to see themselves as. Like, that is a big part of what she is going to do. In some ways, whether she is good at being vice president or bad at being vice president, probably it will be somewhere in the middle, because that's how politics and policy works. So that's one thing. But I do think there are a couple things we don't know. I think there is something about history will tell us much later on how much influence she had. Because part of this deal is that, President Biden, the other people who are in this administration, they have, in a symbolic way already, given her a seat at the table to have her life influence the conversation that is behind the scenes when it comes to thinking about things like minimum wage, when it comes to thinking about things like jobs and women and as well as foreign policy. She is going to bring something else to the table. What she brings to the table, how those conversations work behind the scenes, what her life experience and how it influences the decisions that come out of the White House, whether it comes out from her press secretary or President Biden's press secretary, we're not actually gonna really know that for years and years and years until people start writing the books about this administration, maybe 2 or 3 years once some people leave and other people cycle in, 4 to 8 years after this administration. So I do think there's some things we don't know. And, I am hoping that all of the talk during the campaign about Biden understanding the level of representation that she not only brings from a performative way, but also because her experiences will make her see things a little bit differently. And that should be part of the conversation. There could be whole implications of what that means for our policy. But we're just not going to know that for quite some time, I think. And I also think we don't know how whether history will be kind to her. I think especially when there are a lot of Black women and women of color who are firsts in any position, whether it's for companies or in politics or whatever, a lot of times they're brought in because one, everyone realizes they have a race problem. And then two, it's usually when things are happening that aren't great. And
Somebody messed up.
Yeah. So the person has to start like cleaning up a bunch of other stuff and then trying to climb. And I do worry sometimes that puts especially women of color in those positions in a bad place where maybe they got things righted, but it wasn't so amazing that the next 10 people who come after them revert back to the mean. So I think she has a lot of pressure on her in that respect too. But some of these historical implications are just unknown. They will be there. We just don't know what they're going to be.
I want to keep going right down that path that Shauna led us to, because we had someone submit a question before the program even started, and it comes up on the same issue Shauna is talking about. So I'm going to preface the question by saying all four of you breathe rarefied air. All four of you have been the first Black woman at something. Most likely, you're the first Black woman where you are right now. And that brings responsibility and sometimes unwarranted criticism. So the viewer wants to know, so much media coverage of women of color, especially Black women, lacks proper context or is simply unfair and dishonest. Often it is subtle digs and negative assumptions. I see it shaping people's perceptions. What can we do to break through this? And I'm going to add on, does a vice presidency of a Kamala Harris help this problem at all? And I'll start with you, Aisha.
I think one would hope so, but I think this country has a long way to go. We saw and we continue to see Black women villainized and weaponized, really. And former President Trump definitely zeroed in on Kamala Harris towards the end, using all sorts of names about her. Really was tougher on her than he was on Joe Biden at certain points, as far as the nasty name calling. And so I think that there is certainly still in this country a tendency to question Black women, to question their qualifications, to question their readiness, and to question their intelligence. And I think that we probably have all seen that. Former President Trump obviously did that a lot, questioning the intelligence of Black women specifically. And I'm sure that we have all experienced that. And so I think that it is our job as reporters to make sure that we are being clear that no one is above criticism, no one is above critique, and to really hold someone in esteem is to critique them and to be honest about how they are performing, but to make sure that we're not giving into these standards of, well, is she ready? Is she really being a leader? And holding her to a different standard. And so for those of us who are in position to try to call that out when we see it, or to just raise a question, why particularly are you asking, is Kamala Harris ready? Whereas you may not have asked that of another politician. And so, I mean, I think that's something that you have to be aware of every day.
Yeah.
Erin, what do you think?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I think you just have to go back over and over again to what is the standard, and not holding the barrier breaker to new and different or shifting standards, right? But I think, honestly, what I love about the moment that we are now in as a political journalism class is that we have more company than we had 4 years ago or even 8 years ago, right? I mean, I call people like the women on this screen my colleagues, right? And we have way more colleagues than we used to have. And there is strength in numbers, right? You come for one of us, you come for all of us. And I think that that's true of Black women, whether you're inside or outside of journalism. But I mean, look, especially in journalism, anybody, I see somebody on Twitter coming after Aisha or Shauna, it's on. Like I'm not, nobody, everybody knows better than mess with Sonya, so I don't have to bring her up in this conversation. But I mean, seriously, like that, people are very like it, for all the vitriol that Black women have had, especially in a year where people were saying, listen to Black women. Yeah, that didn't stop them from demonizing Black women as well. You did have certainly social media and others who were very protective of Black women, and that whether that was Black women as candidates or Black women who were covering those candidates, right? People have been very protective of us, which I certainly appreciate, because while I don't think anybody on here necessarily needs defending, there's no shortage of people who have been willing to come to our defense, to call this out, and to say that it's wrong and that it has no place in our political discourse, and certainly no place in political journalism in 2021. To your point about whether the vice president's presence helps or hurts that, I think it does help, because again, her presence on the national, if not world stage, when we get back out again on a daily basis, means that we are having to talk about her, and that folks are going to have to figure out how to talk about her as the vice president, period, right? Keep it about the work. Whatever that criticism is it about the work? And if it's not about the work, then it is on us, because we are also, one of the few, if not the only, in the room sometimes to say, hey, wait, what's going on here? That's not okay. Why are you framing that this way? Why are you asking that question? Would you ask that question if we were talking about a man or a white person?
Donna, what do you think? And then we'll get Sonya.
Okay, I was about to say, can we get to the issue of the readiness? But go ahead.
All right.
Well, what I was going to jump off from what Aaron was saying, though, is that, yes, it is our job, especially as journalists in the room, to question sometimes the framing of the conversation. And that's part of why we are in the positions that we are in. But also, it is our job to treat her the way we would treat any other politician. Yeah. So yes, the question of is she ready, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's kind of BS, fine. But it doesn't mean that we can't ask her hard questions about the policy or hard questions about what role is she actually playing in this White House. Mm-hmm. And I think it is important for us to do that because, one, from a journalism standpoint, it's what we should be doing. Our job is not to coddle Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States. But also for her, she needs to be able to answer those questions. And that will make her a much more historic figure than if everyone believes everyone around her was trying to protect her. She doesn't need protecting. That's not what she signed up for. She signed up to be vice president, and it's our job to keep that in focus at all times.
Yeah. Go ahead and close this out, Sonya.
I was going to say this issue of readiness, let's kill that right now, because it is never an issue for whether these Black women are ready. Black women are always ready.
Ready.
America's the one that's not ready. And so readiness needs to be flipped on its ear and discussed through the prism of the reality, which is America's lack of readiness for what this vice president and every other groundbreaking Black woman brings to the table. Because the truth of the matter is we're overprepared in almost every situation. While the rhetoric about us can be, oh, they're not ready, they don't know, they haven't done this or that. And we know why we haven't done this or that. It's because the opportunities were never extended to us in the first place. In 90% of the cases, we have to roll up and take it because it belongs to us. It's our rightful claim. We have to stake that. But America's readiness is really the issue here. The lack of preparedness for being able to see leadership in a variety of people and not just white men. America's readiness on whether they can handle Madam Vice President meeting with her counterparts in global summits, from NATO to the EU, APEC, the United Nations. Come on, vice presidents over the ages have been mobilized to those settings. So I'm looking to see whether the administration that she's a part of will trust her with those roles, or if they'll fall back on their own lack of readiness in seeing a Black woman do these things, and first seeing a woman do these things, but also to see a Black woman do these things.
And I'm glad you framed it like that, Sonia, because it brings me right into my next question. A lot of what we see and we talk about when it comes to Vice President Kamala Harris is about race. But Black women face the dual problems of both racism and sexism. How do we frame the conversation around the new vice president and we talk about both racism and sexism, or should we not talk about those things? I'll come right back to you, Sonia.
Well, that's why I said what I said at the beginning of this event, Jesse, is for this moment in time, intersectionality has been wiped off of the accomplishment of the first woman to do this, that, or the other thing. It is, okay, the first woman vice president of the United States of America happened to be a Black woman, but a Black woman is defining the accomplishment for women, which means we don't have to explain that racial aspect. America will try to dip in and make it happen on its own, but is that our problem? No. So for once, we get to say we are both of these things. Now watch us, because you're going to get this work. If you've noticed the straightened backs and pride that Black women have right now, not just because Kamala Harris became vice president of the United States, but also because Black women rose up and put our imprimatur on who gets to be making the decisions in this country. And so we're not in a mood right now to hear, are you going to be Black for us, or are you going to be a woman for us? Because the fact of the matter is we've always been both of these things. We're tired of explaining to people that we're both of these things and that we accomplish things through the prism of being both. And now we're just going to have to make you watch us do what we do as both women and Black people.
Aisha, anything to add to that?
I mean, Sonia basically said it all, so it's hard to come behind Sonia. I would say that, looking at, obviously, we have to talk about both. We have to talk about the racism and the sexism and how that doubly could fall on Kamala Harris, how certainly the history of this country is that Black women have borne a very heavy weight in this country, while also carrying so much of the load, whether it's being a part of the economy or what have you. Black women have helped to build this country and certainly have helped to build this Democratic Party that Kamala Harris is now helping to lead. And so the place where, like, the work has always been done by Black women, but the question is whether Black women have gotten the credit for the work that they do. And at all times, as Sonia said, they were being Black and being women. So right. It all has to be addressed.
Shauna, your thoughts?
I mean, I pick up on it. It all has to be addressed. The questions of racism and sexism together, as well as asking questions that have nothing to do with racism and sexism, all of that is going to happen. I don't like to make predictions, and I definitely don't predict elections anymore, that's for sure. But I am almost positive that at some point she's going to take a foreign trip and something strange is going to happen. And we are going to have to cover that through the prism of racism and sexism, whether it's a country where usually it's only been men in the room and now there's a woman. I mean, whether it's the fact that there didn't used to be a women's restroom off the House floor until Nancy Pelosi became Speaker of the House. Like, things are going to happen like that. But I think our job is to have that in the back of our heads, but not every question has to be framed with what her sex is or what her race is, right. Because so much of her work is not, like, while it will be influenced by that, that will not be the main question. And I think it does come back to the work that we have to do as journalists, not just us, but our white and male colleagues and everybody else, to not think of every single question with respect to her race and her sex. Like how she feels about the Iran nuclear deal, it probably has nothing to do with what's between her legs.
Aaron, close us out.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be an either or, and it can't be an either or from a policy perspective either. But there is an opportunity here because she is the first woman. I would be remiss working at a newsroom named for the 19th Amendment that focuses on gender and policy and politics. When her being in the room and her bringing her lived experience to governing, right, means that we are now having a conversation about what governing is going to look like for the majority of the electorate and the majority of the population, and at least before the pandemic, the majority of the US workforce, all of whom are women, right? We're seeing this with the pandemic relief package. We're seeing this, it factors into the voting rights legislation that is going to be coming up. Like what the impact is on half the population. I mean, we're talking about Americans, right? So when you are talking about what this, what is this administration, what are their policies going to mean for rural folk, for educated folk, for faith voters, for people who care about the Supreme Court, for people in the heartland? We can be talking about women in the same way that our default setting has been men for so long, because all issues are women's issues, right?
Correct.
So a woman being the second most powerful person in the country means that all of those issues are on the table, but we also get to reframe the lens through which we talk about these issues.
Believe it or not, we're already halfway through our program tonight. I could just sit and listen to these fabulous journalists talk.
Okay, bye.
But I want to remind our viewers out there that you can submit questions for me to ask our great panel. Please put them in the Q&A or the chat. We'd love to hear your questions. But I have another question I want to talk to our great panel about. Now, I know Sonia has already written about the new VP. I know Aisha's in the White House doing coverage. Aaron has interviewed her, and I know she's going to be on CBS this morning real soon, right, Shauna? So
we don't control that, but don't think we're not asking.
All right. So what I want to know from all of you, through your observations of her beginnings days as vice president, how is she holding up in this job? What is she being tasked to do? What are her areas of responsibility in the White House? And she is that key tie-breaking vote in the Senate when it's 50-50. Does that put her in a political position of power, or could that be detrimental for her future prospects, as we all expect her to be one day a presidential candidate? So Aisha, you're covering the White House every day. What is Kamala Harris doing every day? And explain to us what her seat of power is in the administration right now.
Well, what Kamala Harris has said, what President Biden has said, what they have said is that she is going to be his partner, that they have stressed that word, that this is a partnership, that she is going to be in the room. I believe that she's going to be the last one in the room, when decisions are being made in meetings. This week, President Biden had his first bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada, and Kamala, Vice President Kamala Harris was right there. She spoke. That didn't have to be the case. I know I've sat in many of those bilats with former President Trump. Pence was not always in the room, and if he was only allowed to speak to maybe say, "You're doing a great job, President Trump." But so, her being in that room during that bilat, I think shows how that they are going to make sure, and that she is making sure, that she is going to be in the prominent positions, that she's going to be, when they're talking about the American Rescue Act, that is their main priority right now, that she is, having meetings, she's talking to people about that. She's in the room with the president when he's having these discussions. When he has this bilateral meeting, his first one, she's there, she's making her remarks. So she's making her presence known. And I think what she's trying to say is that she's going to be a full partner on all of these issues, not just on equity. So not just, sorry, I had those kids.
All good.
Yeah, believe me, we all understand.
They're the future. They're the
Yeah.
future.
They are the future. So, but yeah, that she is going to be taking part in all of these issues, not just equity, not just, racial justice, but, whether it's foreign policy, all of these issues that she is going to have a hand in. I do think the question is there one thing that she's going to own completely? And I don't think that has been answered yet.
Aaron, you've had a chance to sit down with Kamala Harris before she was elected vice president and afterward. Tell us about your reactions to Kamala before vice president and then Vice President Harris.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, honestly, I think she's been pretty consistent. She has talked about, bringing her lived experience to governing, to policy, wanting to do that. In the sweepstakes conversation, she said that she wanted to be a full partner with Joe Biden if they were to be elected. She wanted, a similar relationship to the relationship that then Vice President Biden had to President Barack Obama. Wanted to be that last person in the room, wanted to have real input, wanted to be somebody who was really not just there in any kind of ceremonial or symbolic capacity, but really helping to govern, right? And weighing in on those governing and policymaking decisions. And so I think, we're only a month a month and some change in here, but you're seeing that. Yes, she is certainly, swearing in nominees as they are trickling through, right? That's happening. You're seeing that. You're seeing her, standing 6 feet away from Joe Biden in a mask as he is signing executive orders in a flurry. You're seeing her do that. She's in the room for those kinds of things, but she's also doing things like leading a roundtable of congresswomen and activists talking about the pandemic relief response and its impact on women. She is, Joe Biden's taking the COVID vaccine. She's right there taking it too, right? You're saying, parroting his message around the pandemic, but I do think that it'll be interesting to see if there are any kind of areas of separation between president and vice president, the simpatico relationship, right, that Joe Biden said that he wanted. Will that remain intact over the 4 years, or will there be examples of when, maybe they diverge? I mean, just one example I have been thinking a lot about this week, for instance, is you got President Biden out here telling governors, hey, I don't know, minimum wage, maybe you'll make it through, maybe it won't. You have not heard Vice President Harris say one time that minimum wage is off the table. So when we start to look at things like that, I think that she expects to be involved in everything, because that is kind of the agreement that it sounds like they had in conversations during the sweepstakes process. But we know, certainly as senator, there were certain issues that she cared about, from criminal justice to maternal mortality to voting rights to policing. So, whether she weighs in on those types of issues more directly, or whether she also impresses upon the president that these should also be his priorities as well, will be interesting to watch as we go forward.
Well, and okay, let's be honest. We would not be having this panel if she were not a woman of color, because usually in the first 100 days, you do not care that much about what the vice president is doing.
No.
I mean, I don't think it's odd that we don't know like what her portfolio will be yet. Two, maybe it was a little different when Joe Biden was President Obama's vice president, because they needed the Recovery Act passed, because it was Joe Biden who had those relationships in the Senate and in the Congress to like really sort of try to take that on. But also, if we weren't still living in like bizarro world to a certain extent, like we would not care. We would care what the vice president is doing.
What was
Right.
his portfolio? We don't know.
I don't know.
Don't know.
No, I have
Foreign
no clue.
policy, but
It was
we
being
discovered that after
president.
4
It was
years.
being presidential.
It was, yes, exactly. It was making up for a couple of things.
Right.
But so I think that's number one. I think number two, to get to your question of like looking forward to the candidacy that we all think is going to happen, but we don't know for sure, is yes, she is an incredibly precarious position when it comes to running in 2024. I think it's less about being the tie-breaking vote because that is in some ways ceremonial and is expected of her. I think it's more about the fact that she is such a visible vice president because of her race, because of her sex. And when she does speak up, because of that, whether positive or negative, that gets more press than, let's say, Al Gore speaking up does.
Mhm.
And so there is, I'm more than a little positive that like, there are calculations going on about how far she can go with things and what does that mean? And not that she would pull back and not do something that would be good for the country in her opinion, but this is politics. And so they are thinking on multiple levels. So
Mhm.
this does put her in an interesting situation for 2024. And how that plays out, some of it is on what the president of the United States decides to do and where he decides to make sure she is out there, where she decides to make sure she's out there, when she decides to break with the president, what those relationships on the Hill continue to be like. This is not easy from a political.
Tanya, close us out.
Well, I have to say that, and actually what we're seeing right now from Madam Vice President is a mode that is pretty typical of vice presidents early in administrations. They hang back a little. They run the game alongside the boss. They keep it low. And eventually you will see a breakout in some way or another. Probably what would make her breakout distinct is the fact that whatever it is that she chooses to kick the door in on will be something that they may not want to trust her to kick the door in on. So for right now, she's doing the let me lay back and run this the way you guys do the job, the way the vice presidency has been done before I turn it into what I intend it to be. And I do think that she's probably very calculating about that. She wouldn't pick a battle that she isn't confident she could win. So there would be something that is her strong suit, something that is a priority, something that resonates not just with the Democratic base, but with women in particular, because that's such a necessary that's such a necessary overture to make for the fortunes of the party. I think she wants and cares very much about voting rights and what can be done about that. Right now, COVID is the priority for the president and for her. So there's a little bit of a hang back. I'm the vice president. I'm going to do the vice presidency right now. But you'll eventually see her kick the door in on something special.
I do remember sitting there watching the news reports when a Vice President Biden broke with President Obama over the issue of gay marriage and watching how that changed the entire perspective of the White House. I'm waiting for that Kamala Harris moment. We know it's coming. The question is when it comes. I am getting some great questions from our viewers. So at this point, I'm going to turn to the questions being sent in by the people who are watching this great panel. I'm going to throw the questions out to the entire panel and speak up when you want to answer. This is a great first question to start out on, so I'm going to just go straight to it. This viewer says, Kamala Harris's name is often weaponized as a way to disrespect her by mispronouncing it or acting like it's too hard to say. What is the significance of Harris's name for you personally and for the country as a whole? And how can journalists specifically be held accountable to give her the same respect as they do her male counterparts?
Can I tell a story
Of
around
course you
my
can.
own name? when I was on the White House beat and President George W. Bush came into office. I had not been out on the campaign trail with him as some of the other reporters had been. I actually was covering the very active incumbent president who was a lame duck but didn't want to be lame. So when he came in, and he was very friendly about it, he kept calling me Sandra. And I had a colleague named Sandra, and it was impossible to mix us up. We looked very different. So the day he came to me, he said, "I'm going to give you a nickname." And so I said, "Okay, Mr. President, you give me a nickname, I'll have to give you one." And after that, I became Sonia, getting the name right. We all go through that. Our names get mispronounced. Our names are, oops, I didn't mean to call you that or whatever. And it's just, we charge it to the game, to be honest. And it'll happen. It'll continue to happen. There is a political habit of mispronouncing names selectively in order to be disrespectful. You can't give it too much power. I'm not saying that President Bush intended to be disrespectful to me in mispronouncing my name. I had a colleague with a similar name. I could see how that happens, but I made it abundantly clear that it wasn't going to continue. And I think that's the approach that will probably happen with Madam Vice President also.
Anyone else want to jump in on this?
I mean, I would just add to that. Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, it's Aaron with 2 R's. And I will say that every single time. I don't care about your autocorrect. Like if you spell it wrong or say it wrong, I'm going to correct you because my mom spelled it with 2 R's, and so will you, and you will say it correctly. But look, I mean, last year, if we could learn how to say and spell Klobuchar and Buttigieg, we can learn how to say and spell Kamala. Like,
to be fair, it did take us a while to learn Buttigieg.
Correct. We had to do it.
It did. We had to do it, and we did it.
And it's less letters. It's not. I mean, it's like seriously. It's not. It's really. It's just really not that hard. And your unwillingness to learn, because it's not inability. It is somebody's unwillingness to say it correctly.
See what I mean about that lack of American readiness that we were talking about?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I see you jump in, Aisha.
I will say that when you don't name things, or when you properly when you don't put a name on things, it's a way of taking away the humanity or your significance, right? Like someone's name is very close to them. And so when you misname someone, it is a to me, a very special type of dig. And as someone called Aisha, who sometimes get called Alicia and stuff like that. But it's also about learning to stand in your person. I haven't always done that, and because of just the way that I haven't always done that. But it's so important to stand up and say, no, my name is Aisha. It's not Alicia. It's not Aisha. It's Aisha.
Yeah.
This next viewer has another question about something that came up earlier in our conversation. Mm-hmm. This viewer wants to know, you mentioned being careful not to hail Vice President Kamala Harris as a unicorn. Sometimes people don't understand why this type of framing is harmful. Can one of you talk about the dangers of this framing, and why is it more helpful to treat her as any other politician?
Well,
who wants to jump into that one? Shauna, go ahead.
Oh, Zani can take it. No, I think the issue with the unicorn situation, I mean, let's be honest, she is the first to do this, and we can all acknowledge that. But it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, that if we treat her like a unicorn, then every decision may get scrutinized more than maybe it should get scrutinized. Every little thing plays into, this is how a woman of color vice president would do this. And that's just not necessarily true. This is how Vice President Harris is answering this question. This is how Vice President Harris is working with Joe Biden to tackle this problem. This is how she is doing that. But that doesn't mean if Sonia becomes the vice president that she would do the same thing. So I think the problem with the unicorn thing is it encourages people to have a playbook about what Black women do, instead of starting to understand, report on, and have a playbook about how Vice President Harris approaches something. And I think this is an issue, whether we're talking about the vice presidency or, like I said, business or education or anything else, that we forever have to be almost overly representative in the decisions. And yes, I understand my level of what my position in media means, and that I am representing something larger, and I embrace that. It hopefully will help other women behind me. But if I make a wrong decision, it does not mean all the other Black women behind me will also make wrong decisions. And when we treat people like unicorns, then that is sometimes how everyone outside of it will see it, that every decision I make colors every decision another Black woman will make. And sort of when we were having the George Floyd uprisings, and there was a lot of conversations going on inside the company that I worked for at that time, I sort of said, I feel all of this pressure to be as, and I'm sure Harris feels this way to a certain extent too, to be over-prepared or as well prepared as possible because I am a Black woman, because of the unicorn situation. But the amount of pressure that puts on people is out of control. And we have to get to the point where if I do well, you'll hire the next Black woman because you're like, oh, all Black women will do well. Or if I do badly, you won't hire the next Black woman. That's not how white men are seen. And so that is what I think the trouble with the sort of unicorn fallacy is.
Media are addicted to unicorns. That's the other
It's
issue.
a good story too.
Yeah, especially when it comes to race, more than any other topic, except maybe politics, there is just this hankering for a racial unicorn, a person who can take all of this issue we're talking about within this particular story and wrap it up in a neat little bow and solve racism. And we've got to get past that as an industry. There are no easy solutions when it comes to race. There is no easy button. There's no quick solution, no silver bullet, whatever, all of the cliches that you can add to it. We've got to let go of our fascination with unicorns. We hide behind unicorns and often use the lack of a unicorn as an excuse for not even doing stories that need to happen. So it's going to take sea change in the mentality of media in order for this whole notion of unicornism to go away.
We are unfortunately running out of time, but I think this is a perfect question to end on. One of our viewers right now wants you all to please share your own Kamala Harris experience. When have you been the first and or only woman or woman of color, and how did you navigate that? Let's start with Aisha, then I'll go to Sonia, Aaron, and end up with Shauna.
I don't know. Oftentimes, I think that it almost becomes second nature. I started off at Reuters, covering energy, and almost every event I went to, I was probably the only Black woman around. Every once in a while, depending on other hiring at other organizations, there might be one other Black person, maybe two out of like maybe 20 people that are regularly covering these events. I remember going to like this conference for futures trading and all this stuff. It's a massive conference. It was like, it had to be like 500 people, this beautiful country club. And I was the only Black woman in the whole place. I was the only Black person. Like people could just say, and people always would know me because they would go, oh yes, that's you. You're Aisha, right? Who else would it be? So I know, how did I carry myself? It was just, I just did the work. I just did the job. You notice it, but at a certain point, it's like, you just got to do the work because that unfortunately is the way it is often.
Sonia.
I actually had finished my stint as a White House correspondent for the Associated Press by the time I found out that I was the first Black woman they ever gave that assignment to. I didn't know that. I just sort of with those kinds of firsts, you just put your head down and do the work. You can't know possibly how to deal with it. You just are, sometimes you're aware, acutely aware when you're the only Black woman in the room. And when you realize it, you go, well, doggone, I don't know that I felt like being Black today. Or I don't know if I felt like being the girl today, but you just have to do it. And that was the case for me, even when I ran for the White House Correspondents Association board. And I did so at my employer's request, really, only to find out, oh, there'd never been a Black woman on that board before. Well, you know, okay, I get to open that door and go to those meetings and say, I was trying to be Black today, but I'm gonna have to be Black today. You sort of get to pick and choose a bit where you imbue an organization or an effort with your Blackness, which sometimes can be fun. But in terms of opening doors, you also are acutely aware of whether that door will slam shut behind you when you leave. So I actually was quite gratified to see other Black women step in and become White House correspondents. There's so many of them. There's enough. They got a starting five now, or a team. You know, and that's great, because I think at the time I was on the beat, there were maybe three or four of us, and hardly ever at the same time. So it's nice to see that. It's nice that the door has remained open and other Black women are now serving on that White House Correspondents Association board. I would love to see a Black woman become president of the association at some point. For it to be more than a century old and that have never happened is just shameful. But I do hope that that people will understand, when you are the first and only, you're really just in there putting your head down, trying to get the work done so that you won't, you know, collapse in failure. So,
Erin.
Yeah. So I I'm one of 5 women who started a newsroom last year that is the first and only newsroom dedicated to covering gender politics and policy, and I'm the only Black woman that is in that founding 5 of us, and that is something that I do not take lightly. That I you know, and that I talk about, because I am very fortunate in that I get to bring my full lived experience to work every day for the first time in my career. I mean, I don't think, you know, that I was ever trying to diminish my Blackness or my womanhood previously, but really, you know, being able to think about these issues and bring it to bear on my journalism, because I work at a place where these things are seen as an asset and not a liability, and not treated that way, and I don't have to make the case for it anymore, is very important to me. And frankly, the fastest and most efficient way I felt like that was going to happen was by starting over and starting this newsroom with the team that we have started with in our first year. So yeah, that was the first time I've been a first, but certainly came behind a whole lot of firsts that taught me a whole lot and continue to support and embrace me. So I'm very grateful to, you know, every woman who is blazing a trail in our industry, in our country.
And Shauna, you're a producer, so you'll know what I mean when I say we have 30 seconds left.
We have 30 seconds. Yes, so I suspect that a couple of titles that I've had, I was the first Black woman to have them. In some ways, I haven't asked because I don't. In some ways, it doesn't matter. But I think one funny thing that I was thinking when you asked the question was Pete Souza posted a photo from years ago on Air Force One where President Obama came to the back of the plane, and I pulled that photo up just to check and look. The pool that day, I was definitely the only Black woman in the pool that day. Paul Kane recently posted a photo from 2011, right after the Republicans took over control of the House of Representatives. And it's Eric Cantor was having his first like sort of gaggle as majority leader. And you look around the room, it's all these white dudes and like me in the back with like a really sullen look on my face, like, why am I here? But mostly I think I was just questioning whatever it was Cantor was saying to Paul Kane at that moment. I think for the women on this call, I think for a lot of the Black women that we know in this business in general, all of them have had that experience of being the only Black woman in the room. And what it means is what even, and Senator Harris, sorry, Vice President Harris is experiencing this too, you are always on display. And it just is sort of part of the gig. And that is why you kind of put your head down and do the work and let that speak for itself. And you pick and choose when it's time to speak up and be like, my lived in experience is different than yours, and you need to understand that. And it's actually, it is a position of education. It is a position of it can be a position of power. People will listen. It can be hard sometimes, but I find it to be worth it. And if I can post that photo of like hanging out with Obama in the back of the plane, and someone sees that and they think they can do it too, awesome.
I'm going to ask all of these fine journalists to drop their organizational websites into the chat so we can continue to follow them on their journey, telling the truth to America and bringing light to these dark corners that may not have seen light before. I would like to thank Aisha Roscoe, Sonia Ross, Aaron Haynes, and Shauna Thomas for a fabulous conversation. I could sit here and listen to them all night, but unfortunately we are out of time. I'd like to thank them all again for being here with us. Once again, my name is Jesse J. Holland. I am privileged to call all of these fine journalists my friends. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Cheers to close us out.
Thank you so much, Jesse. It's so exciting. Thank you everyone for being here. I will take a moment. I am the first Black woman to be Associate Director of SNPA and the first contract faculty ever to be promoted to associate. So I'm standing on their shoulders. I always want people to know it's so important to be seen, especially all of our Black students, our students of color. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Jesse, phenomenal job moderating. I learned so much. Aisha, Aaron, Sonia, Shauna, you all are phenomenal. And thank you. I listen, watch, and engage with all of your content all the time. So this has been such a treat. Everyone be safe. Stay tuned. Definitely check out the SNPA rundown. We're always posting information about upcoming events. We have an amazing event coming up next week with Professor Huebner. His new book is out, moderated by Professor Steele. And then we also have my favorite, my buddy, Professor Peter Loge, has an event on ethics next week. So stay tuned for all of that. Everyone be safe and have a great night.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.